we have a real treat because we have the wonderful Madonna King. I don't know if you're familiar with Madonna's work. She's a wonderful columnist with the Courier Mail, and she's also a broadcaster with the ABC. And she is now going to host a panel with the people that we have met before, Dr. Martin Seligman, Professor Ellen Lang, and the wonderful, our very own Ross Gittins, who is the economics editor with the Sydney Morning Herald and author of the Happy Economist and Gittonomics. So would you please welcome all of them to stage?
Here's a glass, a cup. Would you consider that half empty or half full? What about if I do this? If you considered it half empty before, isn't it full now? Some people see life through the prism of a cup or a glass. There's always an upside. It's half full. To others of us, that's not always the case. But can you truly measure happiness? How do you do that? Against expectations? Against someone else's happiness? And what does flourishing mean anyway? Today, to have a chat and hopefully to make our Friday a little bit more flourishing all around, Dr. Martin Seligman, world-renowned founder of Positive Psychology, best-selling author and director of the Centre for Positive Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. Welcome.
Thank you.
To Professor Ellen Langer, a pioneering researcher into successful ageing from the Psychology Department at Harvard University. Good afternoon, Professor, and I understand Jennifer Aniston may soon play you in a movie. And he's certainly no Jennifer Aniston, but certainly a star, Ross Gittins. He's economics editor for the Sydney Morning Herald, has been since 1978. He also has a column in the Age newspaper. He's an author and has a member of the Order of Australia for Services to Journalism. Please make him feel welcome. What is the measure of a flourishing life? And we have about 38 minutes to find an answer to that question. Doctor, starting with you, can you measure happiness?
Well, you can, but it's only a small part of what we're after. So if you think about an airplane has a dashboard. Wind speed, fuel gauge, speed through the air, altitude. And depending on the mission you're on, there's no one number that tells you how well an airplane is doing. You have to integrate across the dials. Now, I think human life is even more complicated than an airplane. So I believe that we need gauges that measure P, positive emotion, of which happiness is one, E, engagement, R, how good are your relationships, M, meaning, and A, accomplishment. And depending on the mission you're on, or your values, or national values, one has to ask about all 5 of those elements of well-being. And that's kind of the reason I'm not a happiness theorist.
All right, well, let's go from someone who's not a happiness theorist to an economics reporter. How do you measure happiness? Can you measure it?
Well, yes, you can. You can't measure it perfectly, and I don't disagree with anything that Martin said, but the conventional way to measure happiness is just to ask people how satisfied they are with their lives and to rank that on a scale of, say, 1 to 10. And you can say that that's terribly subjective. A lot of economists would say it's terribly subjective. But it turns out that when they've tried to check this by asking your spouse or asking your friend to rate your happiness, their rating of you and your rating of yourself are fairly consistent.
Okay, well, let's go to Professor in the middle. Happiness presumably is a state of mind, Professor. So are people limited in how much happiness we can have? Those seeing a glass half full will always feel happier than those who don't.
I look at the world a little differently, and not on the macro level when they're asking people how happy they are. People know when they're not happy. And when they're happy, they're typically not asking themselves the question how they are. They're just being. So when you're just being, you're not looking at yourself looking at a glass as full or empty. You're just being. sometimes it's fine to have the glass half empty, and you say, oh, look, there's some more liquid there, maybe I should fill it now. So I have it for later.
But the problem with that, Ellen,
What is the problem, Marty?
is that
And why is he?
And why is he wearing that
Dr.
on his
Seligman?
finger?
Why is he Dr. Seligman and I'm Professor Langman?
no, you're professor in the middle, actually.
Professor in the middle. Okay, go on.
So the problem is that tells us when people are not unhappy. But I believe that what we're after is not the absence of something, but the presence of something. And that's why engagement, good relationships, meaning, and accomplishment really do require thinking about.
Well, can I come in there? Because we're talking about really definitions. Can I ask you then, and I will go to you at the end, Doctor, or Martin, or Professor, whatever you want to be called, what do you call a flourishing life to you, Martin?
Well, for me, it's the same as my first answer, that there are 5 elements of a flourishing life, PERMA, and what we call a flourishing life will depend on which of those 5 elements you value and in what proportion.
Yes.
So we have to know for a nation or an individual what their values are. It's not the job of psychology to change people's values. It's rather, given which of positive emotion, relationships, meaning you value, psychologists can say something about how to best get there.
All right, well, a non-psychology view on this, Ross, and perhaps this is a bit shallow, but if I could give someone in our audience today the choice now of having a $300,000 check, a promise to live an extra year, or perhaps to find love for the first time properly in their life, that's a good point that Martin makes. Happiness or what makes you flourish is different for the individual, isn't it?
That's true, and people would react to that differently. But
What would you take?
well, I've already got someone to love.
And Marty already has a $300,000.
So we know it's something different for every person, and you've been talking about your 5 values, Martin. Ellen, you have a recipe that I read on your blog for a happy, successful life, and it goes by GLADO. What does that stand for?
GLADO. Yes, I think that when one lives mindfully, and mindfulness as I study it, which, just for point of information, is mindfulness without meditation, which isn't at odds in any way with meditation. It's just a different way of getting to the same place. That GLADO is the result. You live a generous, loving, authentic, direct, and open life. And if you start by being generous, loving, authentic, direct, and open, that will also lead you to be more mindful.
So does it matter how you're born, or are you saying very much it's not so much genetic, it's environmental?
Yeah, no, you can tell from the way I talk about extending limits that I'm as far over on the nature-nurture curve as one could get, the continuum, right? Here's nature, one's genetic predispositions, and over here is what one can achieve independent of one's genetic predispositions. And I believe that we are all entitled to and capable of living the flourishing, authentic, happy, successful life.
Martin, you agree with that statement?
Well, I think I agree with the GLADO part, but I think the nature-nurture problem is actually very interesting. So positive emotion, I think, is about 50% heritable. And the best you can do is get in the upper part of your set range by some of the tricks that Ellen and I know.
Professor Seligman.
But let me finish the paragraph. Engagement, going into flow, I think probably does not have very strong genetic components. Relationships, I think, does, but there are tremendous skills that you can learn about them. Having meaning in life, I think, has no genetic constraints.
All right. You were involved in a really interesting study in Australia with an Australian school, and you worked and lived with teaching staff. I think you're doing it again now. What is the one thing we could do in our classrooms to make our young people happy, in your view? And then there was silence.
I can answer that one, Marty.
Go ahead, you answer it and then I'll try.
No, I want to go to Martin on this because
You want him to answer
it was
first?
a really interesting experiment.
He'll have a better answer if it can be a response to my answer. But you're the boss.
I like that. I'm the boss. It doesn't seem like it, does it? No, Martin, I want to ask you first because it was a really interesting experiment.
So I actually am very interested in that question, and I work on it. I believe that a child's well-being and what they learn are synergistic, and that if we can teach well-being in the schools, we will increase traditional learning. So much of what I do is the question of how to teach PERMA to children, and there's quite good reason to believe that when kids are in high well-being, traditional learning is better.
Now, you're not going to disagree with that, Ellen?
No. I wrote a book about almost 2 decades ago, The Power of Mindful Learning. And in that, what I try to make clear is that if we teach one thing and one thing only, it probably should be a healthy respect for uncertainty. And what follows from that, oddly, or maybe not, is a greater respect for other people's views, other people's ways of doing things. If, for example, you ask the student how much is 1 and 1.
Yes.
And the student says 10. Right now, that student would be punished, because it's not the answer that the teacher wanted. If the teacher were mindful, the teacher would ask the student, how did you come to that? And then we would realize that 1 and 1 is 2 is only based on a...
Yes, okay. Yep, okay, no, I
on a
understand.
particular number system.
All right, well, but taking up what you did in these schools, Martin, one thing that breaks my heart, and there's been a lot of public discussion in Australia, is the issue of post-traumatic stress disorder in our soldiers. Is there a way of addressing what you want addressed in schools in our armed forces, for example?
I believe there is, but it's probably different from what you're thinking. I spent a lot of my life working on the question of what you do when the people fall off the cliff. And in general, what we do when people fall off the cliff, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, is only marginally effective. So I'm interested in the question of prevention. So if Australia or the United States were going to send soldiers to a mosquito-infested area, we wouldn't say, well, come back with malaria, we'll give you quinine.
Yes.
Rather, we'd clear the swamps, we'd give them mosquito netting, and we'd give prophylactic medication. Well, for the last 20 years, we have known a reasonable amount about how to prevent depression and anxiety, the 2 major components of post-traumatic stress disorder. So what the United States Army is now doing with all 1.1 million soldiers is to train soldiers in advance in the skills of resilience and well-being in order to cut the probability. In general, I think the work we need to do is before people fall off the hill,
Yes.
not afterwards.
All right, can I bring Ross here? Because, Ross, you've been quite quiet. The role of money in happiness here. Most of us go out and buy a lotto ticket. We spend a lot of money on the Melbourne Cup. How far can money go in making us happy?
Well, money does make us happy, but it doesn't go all that far, and it doesn't go as far as a lot of us imagine. If you're very poor, then money will make you a lot happier because it will give you the basics to live a decent life. But beyond that point, we all imagine that acquiring money, that going for the 300,000 check will be the thing that would do most to increase our happiness. I think we're hardwired to think like that, but it's not true. And we need to train ourselves not to just keep working to make lots of money because I'll be able to buy wonderful stuff. My kids will love it when I'm able to send them to private schools or give them wonderful presents. When your kids would much rather see you in the flesh.
Well, we hear that giving is better than receiving. Is there any sound basis for that?
Yes, there is. There's growing evidence from psychologists that says people do gain a lot of satisfaction from giving to people. And this is a mistake that some economists keep making, that the only satisfaction that comes out of a present is the satisfaction that I, the recipient, get from that present. And if it's a pair of socks and I don't like socks, don't need any more socks, then the whole thing's been a waste of money. It hasn't been a complete waste of money if it's given the other person, the giver, some satisfaction to demonstrate their affection for you.
What about buy now, pay later? What effect on our psyche does that have?
Well, that's about sort of immediate gratification. And I might say that buy now, pay later is the way almost all of us buy our houses. It's a way of overcoming the difficulty that we have to save. You make the commitment and then you pay off the loan, which is a form of saving. But it's not. But delayed gratification is a better way to get satisfaction. I'm not saying we should all save for our homes, but as a general broader proposition, getting things now rather than getting them in the future, thinking about them. People get a lot of enjoyment out of contemplating things that they are going to do.
Yes. So taking from that back to you, Martin, the use of psychology then in government. You've been a thinker in residence in South Australia. How can our governments use what you are doing, what you're talking about, to better policy?
Well, there are two things that I think may be happening in South Australia that are relevant to all of you. Both Ross and I have been interested in government measuring something more than GDP and unemployment.
Yes.
And both the Cameron administration and the Sarkozy administration are now interested in measuring general well-being, which is to measure psychological variables like positive emotion and relationships and meaning in addition. In South Australia, there are two. I've been a guest of the Premier. There are two projects we've been working on. One is the possibility of measuring the well-being of every young person in South Australia and of holding the government accountable for public policy by changes in well-being for young people. And then secondly, bringing the courses that we know increase well-being, increase learning in the schools to both the teaching profession and the mental health profession in South Australia in the hope that we could immunize every young person against depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder.
To you, Ellen, and I want to touch on ageing, and I know many of you heard this morning, this experiment more than 30 years ago. It was amazing. Two groups of men in their 70s and 80s and drove them to a big old monastery in New Hampshire. One group had to live like they did 22 years earlier in 1959. The other group stayed in the present but reminisced about the same period. So clocks, TV, newspapers, 50s, sport, dress and entertainment. And in 1 week, both groups were stronger. Posture, hearing, vision, agility improved. Less arthritis. And those who tried to actually live like they did in 1959 recorded better results. Can we all do that though? Or what makes some of us successful in being able to think like that, to turn back the clock psychologically and perhaps physically, and not others?
Yeah, I think that we can all do it. I think that first, if we asked ourselves, when there's something we believe we can't do, how do we know that? What evidence is there that we can't do it? And that we begin in small ways. I mean, if I wanted to lose 20 pounds, I couldn't lose 20 pounds tomorrow, but I certainly could lose an ounce. If I couldn't lose an ounce, I could lose a half of an ounce, and so on. And so we build up to achieve any of those things. Most people, as far as I know, Marty, maybe you know this as well, placebos are effective for virtually everybody. And all placebos are doing are getting us to put our minds in a healthy place, expect health, and then a third of all diseases, or a third of the people with whatever disease, are cured with a simple placebo.
All right, well, let's explore that a bit because you're talking about the power of the mind there, aren't you? You talked about weight. Let me ask you that. If you went on the same weight loss regime and you thought you could lose a kilogram a week for 3 weeks, you did exactly the same thing, the same person, but you thought this is never going to happen.
Yes, I believe that, as the chambermaid study suggests, that if we believe something is going to happen, first of all, in a direct sort of social psychological way without any hocus pocus, then you set yourself up for success. You look for opportunities to do that which is going to be successful. You avoid things that are going to prevent the success. And then you have the simple effects of this direct mind-body.
I'm going down an elevator, I see someone sneeze, they put their hands on the rail, I put my hand on the rail, I think I'm going to get a cold. Will I?
Yeah, we're actually doing an experiment like that right now with the understanding that if you believe you're going to get sick by being in the presence of somebody who is sick, you're more likely to, in fact, become sick. And to go with Marty's point earlier, that what we want to do is use all this information as a way of not just being not sick,
yes,
but of being far superior to the way we are now.
Your sense of well-being, Martin.
Yes, but, you know, it's beyond that. I mean, we take as a given that as you get older, you're going to fall apart. And we need to question that. I think that when we do, and there are lots of positive models of aging now, and so the whole idea of getting older should change and will change. And right now, when we say 80, when I did that counterclockwise study, these were men who were falling apart, and they were 80. And the 80-year-olds that many of us know now are very vital. So 80 is the new 60. I don't know what that makes 25.
Martin, would you like to add something there?
Well, Ellen is the most imaginative social psychologist on the planet, and I think she's doing great work.
That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Seligman.
Thank you, Professor. You're welcome, Professor in the middle. Now, let's just take one of Ellen's terrific experiments, the chambermaid experiment, in which merely telling chambermaids they are getting good exercise has bodily effects, good health effects. Now, I don't think this is really mysterious, and it's about time someone demonstrated, and Ellen's done it. So if you just think about the cold experiment, to my mind, the way medication generally works, I'm talking medication here, is that medication is a foreign invader. It's a toxin, and is treated by the body as toxic. And the body forms defenses against it, and those defenses, often called the immune system, are generally what's curative and generally relieve symptoms. Now, you don't have to have the foreign invader of medication. You can have the expectation that you're getting a cold. Well, the expectation that you're getting a cold produces inflammatory responses and on. So I think your work, it's very important demonstrations, and for some of it, merely thinking about the body's natural defenses against illness will explain it.
So, Ellen,
notice that he's wearing this little thing on his finger.
And I thought
which is somebody's idea of what an endorphin looks like.
And I thought you were going to hold hands. Ellen, how far does this go? Can memory loss be reversed?
Sure, I think so. I think that there are many changes that occur as we get older, and things that masquerade for memory loss. You know, so at this point in my life, I don't really care what everybody's name is. I care, that if I'm going to see you on several occasions, I'll come to know your name.
Yeah.
So if you tell me your name and later I don't know your name, it's a mistake for me to think I've forgotten it. To forget, you have to learn things in the first place. So there are many explanations of that sort that lead memory loss as you get older to be much exaggerated. I think that when things are meaningful, you remember them. If you're living a life that's not meaningful, there's no reason for you to remember. If people are babying you and telling you everything, somebody is taking me back to the hotel, took me here in the first, I don't have to know how I get there.
Yes.
Right? So it's not that because I'm older, it's not that I've forgotten.
All right,
so
so
on.
let's talk briefly about how to be happy. And who wants to start this? Let's say that person A in the audience is struggling with this a little bit. Where do you start? What's the first step? Let's go across.
Well, I've spent a good part of the last 15 years taking the 200 exercises that have been claimed produce happiness from the Buddha to modern pop psychology and asking which ones really work. And so far there have been about a dozen that in random assignment placebo-controlled experimentation work. So I did a couple of examples at 9 o'clock. One example is statistically, every night for the next week, write down 3 things that went well today and why they went well. And statistically, 6 months later, people who do that have more life satisfaction, less depression, less anxiety.
Are you saying then we do this over a period? Otherwise, we call it instant gratification.
Interestingly, what happens with the exercises that increase well-being, from the first day I took up skiing till 5 years later when I quit, I was always fighting the mountain. And in general, in psychotherapy, dieting, when you work on people's weaknesses, you're always fighting the mountain. And the way we measure effectiveness is how long these things last until they melt. Well, it turns out when you work on the positive side of life, exercises are self-maintaining. You become addicted to, before you go to sleep, thinking about the good things that happened today.
Okay, Ellen, taking up that thought?
What is the question?
The question is, what is something...
I forgot
Memory
it.
loss. What is one thing that we could go home and just focus on?
Well, as I've said now, in several different ways, and you can take the recipe since it's easy to remember, of GLADO. Allow yourself to be generous, loving, authentic, direct, and open, and that will lead you to be enormously happy, and you'll end up generous, loving, authentic, direct, and open. Or go through the mindfulness route, which is just keep noticing. And as you notice, what happens is you become less tied to those things that make you miserable. You become more engaged in your life. And so many, I can't go through all of the different findings, but you end up happier with better relationships, healthier, and so on, from this very simple process of recognizing that you don't know. And when you don't know, then you treat other people differently. You're more respectful of other people. You end up more respectful of yourself and, dare I say, happier.
Ross, from your point of view, the enormous body of work you've done on that intersection between money and psychology, what's your message here?
Well, it doesn't have much to do with money, and it's really not inconsistent with anything that the others have said. But I think that happiness is, like a lot of things in life, best achieved indirectly rather than directly. So that if you want to feel happy, you want to be happier, you don't focus on how happy you are. You certainly don't keep taking your happiness temperature every 10 minutes. You focus on making other people happy. And if you focus on that and you get on with doing things for other people, enjoying their company and all the rest of it, then you will be happy.
Well, all right, so a couple of quick answers here to these.
I'd like to comment on what Ross said. So I think that's true of positive emotion generally, that positive emotion is a side effect of doing other things. But for engagement, relationships, and meaning, those are very often head-on, in which you really have to work at it and concentrate at it. They're not always side effects.
All right, well, let me ask you these, and can I have some fairly brief answers here? You often read these in the media, so let me put them to you. Does colour influence our happiness? Yes or no?
I think, to ask if color influences happiness is, for me, I'd give the same answer as with money, reading, watching television, or anything else, that it depends on how we do these things. Money isn't good, nor is it bad.
Yes.
Reading isn't good, nor is it bad. There is nothing in and of itself that is necessarily advantageous or disadvantageous. It depends on how it is engaged.
But is there any body of
So
evidence?
color,
Yes, that says yellow or
surely,
gold.
if I was brought up in an environment that was all blue and that was comforting, and then I went to an environment where there was no blue, I would probably respond differently. However, if I were aware of the effect that color was having on me, I could get rid of the effects that color has on me. And the problem is that we move through life with primes out there, things that lead us to feel one way or the other, oblivious to how much control we actually have over those.
Okay, we hear that about colour. We also hear it about pets. If you have a pet, you will be a more content person. Any scientific proof of that?
Yes.
For a lip reader, it's very convenient that the consonants in Australian are the same, but the vowels aren't. So I missed what you said.
Are pets good for your health?
Oh.
Pets, dogs, cats.
Well, there is quite a bit
There
of
is evidence.
There is quite a bit of evidence that pets increase well-being, and I think it's actually related to something that Ross said, that you have to take care of a pet. You have to give to a pet.
Is that the same with a partner then?
Well, yes. I mean, we did it early.
Like in truth.
Yes.
The
it depends on your partner, but we did research back in the 70s where we had gave people plants to take care of, and the end result was that they lived longer. But again, it's not in taking care of the plant, taking care of the pet, taking care of the partner or not. It's how that activity is engaged. So if one goes through taking care of anything in a mindless way, now it says this hour I'm supposed to put the dog food out or the buns or whatever, you're not going to reap the rewards.
I want to underline what Ellen is saying. This isn't preaching. It's a very interesting part of the scientific literature. From the selfish gene point of view, it's enormously surprising that the most happiness-inducing things are doing something for another person. But it turns out to be a naked scientific fact, and it tells us that the selfish gene view is not correct.
All right, well, let's go to from the individual to the national, and I'll go to you, Ross. What do you think constitutes then national happiness?
Well, national happiness means running the nation and running the economy in ways that focus on more than just the material side of life. I believe that our politicians are all pursuing gross national happiness. It's just that they define gross national happiness as gross national product.
Yes.
And they think that the more we have, the faster the economy grows, the faster our standard of living improves, the happier we'll be. And they need to realise, what we all need to realise, is that money is important and that the material is important, but there are all these other dimensions, and we can often have economists recommending solutions that will improve our material well-being at the expense of our social well-being, at the expense of our relationships.
Okay, so I saw you nodding there, Martin. Do you think we can flourish as a country with where social and environmental problems perhaps abound?
Well, I want to underline what Ross said. If you measure the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing. And for 100 years now, our politicians have been tied to the measurement only of wealth and unemployment. And I think what's become clear over the last 2 decades is that human well-being is about a whole bunch more than wealth and unemployment. So the beginning is the measurement of positive emotion, engagement, good relationships, meaning as well as accomplishment. And it's very important that England and France are moving in that direction, and I hope Australia will be as well.
So, Ross, then, if our workforce was happier, would we be more productive?
Well, there's two things to say about that. The first thing is, if our workforce was happier, we'd be better off, whether that made the workforce more productive or not.
Yes.
But there does seem to be increasing evidence that a happier workforce is also a more productive workforce.
Okay, so you want to say something, Ellen?
Well, just that if we had a happy workforce, we'd probably have a healthier workforce.
Yes.
And if they were healthier, we'd be saving money as individual nations.
Does
Yeah,
that
and
make-
I also want to comment that the essential...
Is it his turn?
It's his turn.
The essential
We'll give him a
reason,
go.
the essential reason that I'm interested in happiness and well-being is not per se, but I think there are three downstream effects of well-being. Although the evidence isn't conclusive, I think
Yes.
it points there. People who have high well-being are probably more productive, they're probably physically healthier, and they're at peace.
Okay, so we've gone from the national back to the individual from something you said, Ross. What about buying experiences rather than things? Does that change how we feel?
Yes, it does. I mean, there's a line that says people who don't think money buys happiness don't know where to shop. And there is actually some truth to that. There is now some psychological evidence that says we get a lot more satisfaction out of buying experiences than we get out of buying things. And that's the thing about experiences, is that we can think about them, we can reflect on them, we can talk to our friends about them. And the other really nice thing about experience is that the further it gets into the past, the rosier it becomes.
All right, well, can I ask you that, talking about experiences, no one lay on their deathbed and said, if only I worked that extra day. What's on your bucket list? What kind of experience before you go to the great big economy in the sky?
Well, maybe this is a good sign. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about my bucket list. I did have a vow that I wanted to do every bushwalk in the South Island of New Zealand before I kicked the bucket, but I've done most of them.
Oh, that's a pretty
The
good...
one I do have on the list is to read War and Peace.
Okay, all right. Let me ask Ellen and Martin the same question. Your bucket list, something...
I don't have a bucket list.
Because you've done it all?
No, because I'm going to live forever. No,
Well, you can still have a to-do list.
No, I don't think that it's in any particular activity. That if I'm enjoying myself right now, there's no need for me to be in Paris.
Yes.
If I'm eating something that is delectable because of the way I'm approaching it, there's no need for me to, again, go to a fancy restaurant. So that in the living mindfully at the moment, life only consists of moments.
All right, Martin.
You make the moment matter, then your life matters, and you don't need a bucket list.
Okay, I just want to go before time's up to you, Martin.
Well, unlike Ellen and most of you, I think the present is overrated. And I think we're creatures who live in the future. Now, interestingly, we routinely have people write their obituary, first write their vision of a positive human future, and then their obituary through their grandchildren's eyes about what they did to contribute to a positive human future. So if you asked me what I value, it would be contributing to the possibility that after I leave, there will be more flourishing on this planet.
Well, I think that's a lovely note to leave it on. Could you please put your hands together? Dr. Martin Salomon, Professor Ellen Langer, and Ross Gittins.